So we have about an hour together, and what we're going to go through today is a conversation about design thinking and OKRs as advertised, tailored for healthcare leaders. Design thinking and OKRs are definitely not healthcare specific, and in fact, in my humble opinion, are underutilized in healthcare, and I'm all about changing that. So let's get started. I'm just going to introduce myself for a second. I spent most of my career, not all of it, in consulting. I did have some time in industry, in financial services, in technology. I also have an accent and have worked in many different countries, lived in different countries too. So that was what I was up to most of my career. And about 6 years ago, as part of my consulting work, I stumbled upon design thinking because I was trying to help a client be more innovative. And all the light bulbs went off for me, having come from a more traditional consulting background where you go and you meet the client and you write your notes and then you spit out a PowerPoint and then you adjust the PowerPoint and then you have a big meeting where you present the PowerPoint. This was a very different style of working with clients where we were relaxed enough and skilled enough to co-create with them, but only because of that design thinking skill set that we'll talk about quite a bit today. And for those who are WBL members, I'm a newbie to the group. I love it. I was at the summit, thrilled to be working with many other leading women in healthcare. But that's my before life. My current life, which started in about 2019, is when I stepped out and started my own company. And I have actually been just delighted with this journey I've been on, even though it has its moments. Lots of clients, lots of industries working around the world, particularly during COVID, and many engagements. And when we look at my client list, it's everything from Winnebago to Google to lots of healthcare, which is where I'm focused right now. So that's a little bit about me and what I'm doing here and what I care about. But let's talk a little bit about you for a second and what you probably see in your world, whether you're in a smaller organization, your own company, or even large organizations. So those of us who are either leading organizations or consulting to them or starting our own shops probably have this kind of experience to varying degrees. So this is where everybody has their ideas and their mission and their vision, but at the end of the day, they're failing to meet their targets. A lot of executives will admit that they have a hard time bridging that gap between the strategy sessions and those PowerPoint sessions with the fancy pants consultants and the day-to-day implementation. How do we connect those dots better and bridge that gap? And honestly, at the end of the day, if you ask team members how leadership is tracking what they're doing, how they're staying connected to the mission, that's even below the halfway mark. So this is work that was done, studies that have been pulled together that I thought was very interesting because when we're in the space, I'm guessing for many of us, it feels like we're the only ones who are struggling with these issues. So this is the world we live in, right? Either as leaders or as consultants or as people running our own businesses. And now I really am going to ask you to chime in here. I can tell you the answer from the WBL webinar where we're using polls. It's a smaller group here. But my years of experience and my research has shown me that the reason why that previous page is happening is because of some combination of these, plus others that are not on the page. So I'm going to pause here. And again, either in the chat or blurt it out. When you see these 6 that have risen to the top in my work, which of these are jumping out at you in your current world or situation? What are you struggling with the most? Maybe your top 2.
I was talking with the group yesterday. They were describing some of their goals and what they were planning on doing. And it almost seemed they were clearly having difficulty with how to execute from a strategic viewpoint. I'm not even entirely sure, though, that they were cognizant of their own challenges. And it was really not appropriate for me at that time to sit down and say, you're really struggling and you think your issue is over in one area. It's really over in how you're prioritizing your work and in a few other, just some really practical things. So they had a lot of competing priorities. That was one of their issues. And in a strange way, outdated skill sets, but almost in a different phrasing where they weren't aware of the challenges that they were actually having.
Yeah, I think that when you're in the organization, it's like you're in this fog, right? Because you've got so much to do. You don't really know what the issue is. You don't really have time to even step back and think about it. And I'm looking in the chat as well. So clear, measurable goals. Some people are nodding virtually to the prior one. I think low engagement and motivation for sure. Competing priorities. What bubbled up in the WBL webinar was misalignment and competing priorities. But all of them have their moment for sure. And I think when I talk about outdated skill sets, which is just a huge bucket with the world changing the way it is between AI, and I look particularly around me in healthcare, AI, of course, is pushing everybody out of their comfort zone. But we'll talk a lot about how the skills around OKRs, around design thinking, are those human-centered skills where we all better up our game. And there is research showing that when people are reaching for AI skills, and of course it's top of everybody's list, right next to them are the human-centered skills that have also atrophied for a lot of people. So definitely what you're sharing. Competing priorities and misalignment, organizational design with silos, priority for one group might not be for the other. So these issues in organizations and people working together are as old as time. And yet they're still the same things that are holding people back and the same things that people have not been able to master. And that light bulb moment for me when I stumbled upon design thinking back in the day was the most productive and effective way in one big vitamin shot that I'd ever found for dealing with kind of all of these at once. Except for maybe the clear and measurable goals, which is why we'll talk about the OKR framework and how valuable it can be.
There's a few notes in the chat here.
Yeah, let's have a quick look and see. Yes, I think that all of us are playing with AI, I'm sure, all day for various purposes. And it's game changing on the one hand and holds us back on the other hand because it is very immature, even though it's crazily advanced at the same time. I think that we have to, as leaders, keep our eye on the ball across all of the skills that need to be updated. And my jam is the human-centered skills. There's lots of videos out there about how to learn AI, but I want to talk about the human-centered skills and how we keep the balance. Great. Is there anything missing from this list? We've mentioned AI for sure. Anybody seeing anything that's not highlighted here? Okay, so let's stick with these ones for now. And I'm going to tell you, since we are going to have a bit of a healthcare focus for this conversation, that when I've been working with my clients, particularly as SALT Collaboratory, I've got a bunch of case studies. These three are ones that I've done webinars before. And if you're interested, I've done them all with clients, so you can hear the client perspective as well. But when clients are working with me, or if they know that I have the design thinking skill set. And that's often what they're reaching for. In the functional medicine example, my client had come in and built an international strategy, old school, talked to a few people, write it up, present it to the CEO. And none of her leadership peers would support it because they'd been there for much longer than her and they had not had any input. So she knew that I could do the bring the people in the room and have the conversation that was during COVID, even remotely. So that's one example of bringing in the design thinking skills. Another was health transformation for Delta Dental here in the Seattle area, helping them come up with their oral health strategy. We'll talk a lot about the fundraising growth strategy for Seattle Children's, but all of those have the word strategy in them. And design thinking isn't typically what people reach for when they're building a strategy end to end. It's helpful, but we need to be able to plot a direction. and to show where we're actually going, not just have a really productive workshop where we talk about the ideas of what we want to do. I don't know about you. Have all of you been in design thinking workshops in your time where there's the sticky notes and all of that? Have you ever said, oh, that was an awesome workshop. Whatever happened to all of that stuff? Where did it go? The ideas were great. What happened? Because sometimes when we look at approaches and frameworks in isolation, they're very good at one thing, but we are not doing only one thing. And so for me, that's why this reach for these two really proven frameworks became the way that I think about helping clients build strategies. So for those who are relatively new to design thinking and OKRs, this part is for you. When I think about design thinking overall, a lot of people will think about it in the context of user research or designing of products, and it's incredibly helpful for all of that. But at the macro level, it's this disciplined approach to creative problem solving. We're not going to pull it out if we have something mundane to do. We're going to use it when we've got something hard that we need to do. We think about who we're building something for. We think about, in an organizational context, who we're solving the problem for. And so it's a skill set, a body of knowledge, something that needs to be learned or taught in order to master. And it's doing this particular job of creative problem solving with people for people. And we'll talk a little bit about how we need frameworks and mindsets and methods and all of that to make that happen. But the thing that is interesting, and the reason why I call them proven, is because studies have been done to see what all the hype is about. And yes, indeed, design thinking can make you 2 times faster to market. So they are finding that it really helps teams work together more quickly and more effectively, that companies who have this capability are achieving a third higher revenues and certainly higher returns. So the design thinking thing is real, even though some people are saying design thinking is dead or whatever. In my opinion, too valuable to go anywhere, and something that as leaders, we should all have in our back pocket. OKRs is something different. OKRs is a goal-setting framework, and its purpose is to really align teams around ambitious objectives and measurable outcomes. And each word is there carefully. The point about OKRs is it's not just about we want to do better. It's about we see the mountain that we can climb and we are going there. As a team, we are committed and we want to do the very best that we can do. It wakes everybody up out of their slumber. But instead of just pointing at the mountain, it shows very clearly which base camps we need to reach by when in order to make progress. And what I like about both of these methods or frameworks for people like us is because we've been around the block, we don't need the 500-page textbook on each of them. I feel like we understand what these are doing, and when we see how they get to these results, we'll be able to start to integrate them, at least the concepts behind them, into our work relatively quickly. Again, OKRs are having lots of studies and positive impacts, and definitely worth knowing. And that's why they are inside all of these companies. Most of these organizations use both. IBM adopted design thinking in a major way, probably the biggest design company in the world. So there's lots going on, not so much in healthcare, right? I don't know about you, but I don't see it too much in healthcare. What I did, and what you may have heard me talk about in some of my LinkedIn work, is I started to see a way to pull them together, not because I was thinking about it, just because I was naturally doing this work at functional medicine for the international strategy or at Delta Dental. Because any challenge we come into, whether it's how we're going to run the company or whether it's a strategy we need to design, it has to start somewhere. We have to put down an anchor and figure out what's going on. So the meeting that you were talking about earlier, where they didn't even really know which way was up. You can't do work until you have a well-grounded approach to figure that out. And every situation is different. So the way that we approach that anchor phase and aligning on the aspirations is going to be different as well. No two programs look alike. Once we know which way is up, then we can think a little bit more clearly about where we really want to go. What are we envisioning for the future? Which mountains are out there? And we can set that strategic direction. Great. Once we've done that, then we have to get there. And the thing about getting there is sometimes we've got a clean sheet of paper and we're just starting to come up with what we're going to do because we're starting out with this approach in the beginning. Often, though, we're in the middle of things. And so now that we have this direction, we have to look at what's going on, figure out if what we're doing is going to get us there. Likely not, because otherwise we wouldn't have started this in the first place. But then we're going to have to decide what we're continuing to do, what we're stopping, if we are continuing, if what we're doing is innovative enough to actually get us to that mountain. So we've got some work to do there. And if you're following the color coding just a little bit, that's when we're going back to our design thinking toolkit. We started out with our design thinking toolkit in blue. That was what helped us have those anchoring conversations. We switched to OKRs for the purple, for the envisioning. Now we're back in design thinking, a bit of a zigzag. But if we want to keep the party going, and we don't want to have situations where people say to us, whatever happened to all that good work? Where are the ideas? We have to track. And OKRs provides a really great construct for how to do the tracking in a way that promotes accountability and promotes support between team members, because we have a lot of visibility into what's going on. If a team is struggling, we know about it straight away, and we can move resources to help that person rather than wait until the end of the quarter and give them a hard time because of what actually happened. So in my experience, this is a more evolved and positive and energized and ambitious way of working that I can say delivers the results that I was expecting, and perhaps even more so, because when we talk a little bit about the Seattle Children's example, we'll see how from the before world to the after world, they were able to do their annual planning in 40% less time. They shaved a month off and they were done while everybody else was struggling and having a whole ton of meetings because they knew where everything was and how things were going. So we're going to look and see how we get to that. Any questions on this whole zigzag thingamajig?
And I'll just add, I love this visual. I feel like this is the clearest way I've seen it, where they're both working together in certain pattern. So I appreciate this.
Oh, good. Okay. And then if you're seeing the name, you always have to name your babies, right? So when I was thinking about this, we all have our reasons for why we do what we do. And I struggled in my career as a management consultant way too much, sitting in a cubicle, writing a deck again and again. And I feel like leaders don't necessarily have the right form for doing the work that they need to do. I'm working out now with my trainer, and we do 2 half-hour sessions a week. I have muscles, I really do, because I have good form and he's making sure I have good form and we're not wasting time. And I really want all of us to have this experience of having great form in our work as well. So that's what this whole PeakForm thing is all about. Okay, so let's do a very quick review for those who need it, or introduction for those who have not worked with design thinking, around the design thinking framework and all of that. So many of you will have heard these words before around how design thinking isn't necessarily a process because it's iterative, but it has these key components to it. In my world, leaders usually feel like their job is to come up with the plan, with the idea. So they live here. I'm the leader, we're going to do X. And they skip a lot of the work ahead of that of really understanding, just like you were saying earlier, what is the real problem here? Are we even working on the right thing before we jump to ideas or strategies or plans? And we do this by allowing ourselves to look and pay attention to what's going on, to dig into the issues, And because we have great methods that we'll talk about in a second, we're able to look at a lot of content and a lot of information and very quickly, in a collaborative way, define or zero in on what needs to happen. So this world becomes not just important and critical, but actually doable in a reasonable amount of time. Remembering that 2 times faster to market story, it's because we can get through this. But then once we have considered a whole bunch of ideas for doing things, instead of saying, and we're going to launch it tomorrow, we take a little bit more time here to make sure that whatever genius we've come up with is in fact going to solve the problem before we make that big splash. So this is all intuitive, and doesn't everybody work like this? And you can answer that question for yourselves, because the answer is no. The leaders rush to the answer, they rush to put it in the market, and it doesn't go well. So introducing this helps de-risk that type of plan or work. And when we work this way, which is different from sitting in the cubicle and writing the PowerPoint, we're introducing different mindsets. It looks different, it feels different, because it's more visual. There's lots up on the walls. We get to be creative. If you ask people what they think and you give them a few minutes to respond without all the talking, you'll be surprised at how creative and imaginative they are. We're empathetic. We actually take time to care and ask the question. We collaborate. This is a team sport. It's not really something you can do on your own. Lots of questions and very iterative. These are some pictures from some workshops that I did at a children's hospital a few years ago, where all of this actually happened, all of the mindsets and the approach. The magic, though, is in the methods. So we can't get any of that stuff on the prior slide done if we don't have the mechanics, if we can't be the engineer of that experience. And this is where the learning comes. If you're going to become a design thinking instructor or go through a design thinking course, this is what you're going to learn. You're going to learn there are different methods for different things that you might want to do. You can combine them in different ways. And so if you're given 90 minutes or 2 hours with a group of leaders, you can go in and ace that experience and get that outcome by knowing that you want to start with what's on your radar, and then you want to do a rose, thorn, bud, and then you want to do a round robin, right? These are all words that I didn't know, but they are, in fact, what makes the magic happen. So this is just a little bit of a learning curve. It looks easier than it is. It takes a lot of practice to knock an egg on your face when you're doing this, but this is the secret sauce. Design thinking. Any questions? Of course, there's lots more to it than that, but that's my take on how we use it in organizations. Okay, let's talk about OKRs. Some of you came into the session saying that you're very interested in OKRs.
Hey, Hannah.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit more about, so on your last slide, sorry, I couldn't get off mute fast enough.
Sure.
Timing, like in the
Yes.
spectrum of how you've seen this look most successful. And the other thing I'm curious about is, have you used this with startups? Because I'm spending a lot of time with startup CEOs and their teams. And I'm just curious, have you had that opportunity to engage in that way?
It's funny that you bring that up, because even though I've been working mostly in large organizations, people like you and others are saying, startups, we've got lots of people who think they know everything, and yet we're still having those same challenges. I will say that universally, if the person who has been introduced to run the session, if the person is external, ultimately even better if they're internal, has been introduced in the right way as an expert in the skill set, and that person has the right presence and the right agenda, it can be done and run with, I'd say, anybody, honestly, because I've done it with executives who are running Delta Dental who come from Amazon and other very seasoned leaders. This is new to most people, whether they're in startups or in large organizations, going back to that atrophying of skill sets we were talking about. So my hypothesis is that if the person doing this workshop has sat down with the CEO or whomever and explained what's going to happen and what the outcomes are going to be from the workshop, there's usually an appetite to at least try it. And with the right expertise, it works well. I would say you can't get much done you can get some stuff done in an hour. I would say minimum 90 minutes by the time you've pulled everybody together and explained how the game is played. Sometimes people have a half a day. I've done sessions like that. Sometimes if you can get even more time, it's a long day, but you can get a lot done. I'm actually looking at doing some work for 2 days in the sort of startup space. So we can talk more about it. This is essentially what you're doing is you're taking the time of people sitting around the table. If they're in a startup environment or a company, they are the people who have the information that you need, the experience that you need. And if you put them in a meeting to talk to each other, good luck to you. But if you put them in a session where you say to them, okay, I'm leading here, and I'm going to ask you a question for the next 10 minutes. I want you to think about whatever the topic is. And then I want you to take what you've created and put it into this method that will spit out that answer. What you're able to do is tap into their expertise in a much more efficient and effective way. And so the people who don't like to talk or who feel intimidated or whatever have equal participation and often the best insights and the best ideas. So we can talk more about it, Denise, but I'm a fan in the startup field as well. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
Great. All right. So very quickly, the OKR side of the house, right? OKRs are not done in isolation. We don't make them up out of nowhere. We do them in the context of the vision, mission, and strategy of the organization. They're not for the day-to-day work. This is about your ambitious goals of where you're trying to get to as an organization. Oh, you're not going to have an OKR for everything everybody's doing. You're going to have OKRs for the stuff that's going to move the needle. And when you design them, what you're actually doing, going back to that mountain metaphor, is understanding your mission and vision and saying, as a result of that, I need to go here. I need to climb this mountain. I need to get to this place. This is what I can see as my ambitious target. And we don't want 40 of them. Some people say 2 to 4, 3 to 5. Right? You need to be able to wake people up in the middle of the night and say to them, what are your objectives and what are the key results for the stuff that you're involved in? This is stuff that becomes instinctive to people working in the organization that they have had a part in creating. Each objective then is going to have 2 to 4 key results. The beauty of OKRs is that they're not overcomplicated. The way that this works is it helps people understand, connect, and stay very focused on the prize, which is often what gets lost when everybody gets busy. Now, there are lots of things that OKRs are not, right? They're not performance management goals. Because if you conflate the two and you tell somebody, I'm going to measure your performance on your OKRs, they're going to pad them and they're not going to be ambitious. The way that we think about OKRs is if you achieve 70% of them by the end of the quarter, that's a party. If you achieve 100%, it's too easy. We want that fire in the belly, very startup-like, Denise, to be pushing for doing things that seem harder than they are. Definitely not to-do lists or mundane work. They're not KPIs either. So if you think about the metaphor of I'm going to a place in a car, the KPIs are the dashboard. Do I have the gas? Do I have the oil? This is not what that is. You need all of those things too. This is more about where are you going and how are you going to know that you're getting there. They're not static. They're reviewed all the time. They're updated every quarter. And they are definitely not top-down mandates. In the sense that, yes, the vision and the strategy and perhaps the OKRs at the macro level of the organization are set by the executives. But then in larger organizations like Google and others, each team then looks at the OKRs of the leadership above them and designs their own for their own team. And we're going to see that in the Seattle Children's example in a minute. In the healthcare world, friends, not so much, right? One of the only organizations I've seen that's gone all in on OKRs, and you can look them up, is Cleveland Clinic. And here is an example of how Cleveland Clinic talks about their OKRs. An objective would be best place to receive care anywhere, Key results, you can see in front of you, safety events, what's the metric, what's your intention to increase or decrease it, what's the target, and they publish what they're doing at the end of the year. So everybody in the Cleveland Clinic, and this is just one of several pages, knows this and shares this and understands that this is what they're targeting. So hopefully, if you're doing what I suggested in the beginning, you're starting to think about what could this look like for my organization, or the strategy I'm on point for, or the startup that I'm working with. What would ours look like, and how would we develop them? So bear that in mind. But let's talk a little bit about the story of how it actually worked. So Seattle Children's Hospital, they have a foundation, and my client was very interested in these particular challenges. So like you were saying earlier, there's all sorts of things going on. This client wanted to break the reactive work cycles, enhance the team alignment, resource allocation needed to be optimized, outdated skill sets, that's code for developed strategic leadership capabilities. Her team had atrophied. So she wants all of this in a bundle, please. And she wants to be able to do her work more effectively going forward. She was new, she'd inherited 3 teams. Often it's leaders who are in new roles, who are a little bit more open to trying new things. So for her, we did the full PeakForm run through. And to your question, Denise, how much time do we need with the leaders? Not that much, right? There's some work that people like me do behind the scenes with the key lead, but the amount of time that we're actually spending in workshops is concentrated because the work is concentrated. This team, because they were looking for the skills, were also taught how to do this so that they could do it after I left. So I actually certified them in PeakForm capabilities, taught them the design thinking, which they've observed all the way through, but I had to move them from the passenger seat into the driver's seat. So throughout these phases, and I'm just going to give you a little taste of what this can feel like step by step, remembering that every organization is different. So we didn't start this way with functional medicine. For them, we did a different method, the abstraction ladder behind me, because that's what they needed. This was a group who knew they had fundraising targets, but they were stuck. From understanding their current state, we were then able to work with their leads to craft their OKRs. We didn't just jump into, okay, what should the objectives be? We did that anchor phase of, wait a second, what's going on here? So that when I craft objectives, they're in concert with what's actually happening. Looking at the vision and mission of the organization, this team came up with their annual OKRs for the leadership team that they then shared in a broader workshop that we did with them with their team members. This is the first time that some of these people have ever been brought into setting objectives. They've never been asked to do that before. Their comments afterwards were things like, I didn't know our objectives could be so ambitious. Different in startup organizations, in these large organizations where people have been pulled into day-to-day work without thinking about strategy, this is a big wake-up moment for them. Then we get to getting ready to setting the strategic direction, getting into innovate to execute, and we now have some objectives and some key results, like in philanthropy, they came up with Seattle Children's is going to be the charity of choice in the WWAMI region, in the Washington, Alaska, Montana, Idaho area, right? So this is what they're planning to do. They have their key results of how far they need to get, but they've got all these projects going on, tons of them. Question is, what do we need to do? How do we map the projects to the key results? How do we grade them? Are they going well? Are they struggling? Are they somewhere in the middle? And once we've done that, the ones that are green, we can keep, perhaps. But the ones that are not green need to be assessed and prioritized. Which ones are we going to fix? Which of these red and orange ones are we going to fix? And which ones are we going to leave behind? How can you do that in an hour's meeting or an hour and a half's meeting? You use a method, one of those design thinking methods. You say, for example, these are all of the projects that you identified as needing help or needing work or being important. Let's rank them in order of importance. Let's have a debate and a discussion and even a fight, if you want, about whether peer-to-peer is more important than monthly giving. We'll align those in terms of importance. We'll lock them in place. We will add altitude to see how difficult they are. So the higher up they are, the more difficult they are. And then we'll make our quadrants. Only then will we decide, when we put in our lines and our ways of looking at what we should do first, second, and third, then we will be able to see which ones are strategic because they have high impact but are difficult, which ones will be high ROI, high impact, low difficulty, which ones are luxury, and which ones are quick wins. So we didn't have to have 15 hours of meetings to decide which projects we should focus on. We were able to have the right people in the room with the right method to get to the right answer. And that's where you see light bulb moments for the team. Jessica was the lead. Like, this is what she'd been looking for since she started working there. Where is my map? Where is my killer slide that told me what I need to be doing? Here it is, created by the team. So if something is a luxury program and we're not doing it anymore, everybody understands why. A little bit mind-blowing for them. What came out of that is any of the projects that were strategic but needed help, they got pulled into design sprints. This is where we're using our design thinking again. And we went deeper. We started to pull out some of the innovation methods, not just the understanding methods, but how do we actually come up with new ideas? How do we build out these new ideas? So for these two initiatives, we actually went hard to make them better and more productive. And then, of course, in this measure to impact piece, one of the team members, the project manager, made sure that she was able to track everybody's performance against those key results in bi-weekly meetings. So everybody had to keep their numbers up to date. I took some of the specifics out, but they needed to be able to know where they were in 2-week increments so that they could answer questions from leadership, so they could see which parts of the program needed help. So that was their pass through. And this is what they got out of it. And actually, what I love about this slide is they created their own case study saying, we invested in doing PeakForm and it turned out very well for us. So they were quite pleased. The most important thing, or one of the most important things, is what I shared earlier about how working this way organized them so that they could finish their planning for the coming year in 40% less time, which of course had a financial implication as well. They don't go anywhere without their little map. And they've also graded which ones are we doing, which ones are we working on, which ones are we trying new things. This leadership team can go to anybody in the organization and make sure that they understand what their work is and why it's happening. Another big change was they knew where everything was. They could actually find the numbers. So when the chief development officer or the CEO of the foundation picks up the phone on a Friday night or a Thursday night and says, I need your numbers on, and everybody scrambles and it's a panic, they can now answer those questions literally at the push of a button. And that meant that the senior director, who was the one who had to put out all these fires every time she got those calls, had a huge decline in the amount of time and money she was spending doing that. She could use her time and focus on more important, more strategic things because she had this machine running of where the numbers were, who was accountable for what. Each key result has an accountable person. There's RACI everywhere. So she had her shop in order and she was able to get her numbers whenever she needed them. The other thing, going back to the outdated skill set, was because our friends got certified, and this really meant me staying on afterwards, showing them design thinking methods, coaching them through sessions that they could facilitate without me. So we'd practice together. They did 15 of these with cross-functional team members around those initiatives that they were working on. Some of them included the CMO of the Children's Hospital, who had never seen teams work this way before. So all of a sudden, they're becoming a strategic resource. Their IT group is asking them to coach. They're taking care of coaching their own people. But that's really what we want. We want people to have the skills to be able to do it themselves. So this is what I wanted to show you. And I wanted to share my passion and commitment to using these methods and helping teams get to these types of results more quickly and in a way that can be sustained going forward. So I just want to pause there and see if there are any questions, and then we can talk about what we might want to do next.
I just love it, Hannah. It's awesome. And it gives me a lot of thought around the startups I'm working with and creating. And because it is such a great way to pull two really critical concepts together.
So
magic.
Yeah, I think what you're doing as a leader is the two things you need to do. You need to be very clear and very focused, and OKRs gives you that clarity. But you also need to be creative, right?
Yeah.
You need to be able to work collaboratively and across different teams, and design thinking does that for you.
What I love the most, frankly, was your emphasis on empathy. Because I think what happens, and I've seen this in multiple businesses, including my world of United, where we talk a lot about trust and empathy and engagement and getting people to really be all in. But unless you start with that, you're never going to get it.
No.
Because they're just going to be feeling like, you know, that which they do, that they're being told to do something versus they're being asked to come forward with their ideas. So I really love your emphasis on that.
Thanks, Lisa. And I think the reason why leaders do it isn't because they don't want to, it's because they don't know how to.
They either don't know how to, or they don't, they feel the pressure. It's too, I got to get it done now.
Exactly. And my son is just about to go to college, and they learned design thinking in high school. He's going to learn it in his business school. We didn't. It wasn't a thing. We missed it. So for those who are thinking about this, and maybe Denise, this is something we can do if you want after this session, there's a lot to process. And so if it's helpful to any of you who are on the call, if you wanted to spend some one-on-one time, we could do an exercise that looks and feels a little bit like, okay, if you had to put PeakForm in front of you and everything that it means, how would your organization score, if you want to call it that? Are you good at anchoring but bad at envisioning? Are you great at envisioning but bad at delivering? What's going on in your shop, just as a way of thinking about the landscape? And then to the earlier point of, we don't even know what the challenge is. Let's think about that. If you are struggling in any of those buckets, why is that happening? And if you have 10 reasons why it's happening, well, the CEO doesn't talk to so-and-so, and we haven't been able to hire this person, and fill in the blank, then we can do that matrix, right? We can plot those in terms of the importance to fixing things and the difficulty, and see where it makes sense to maybe start investing effort to turn the tide. And we can even talk about, okay, you've got lots of experience. Why don't you try this type of workshop with this type of method, or just pull this into a meeting, or try it with low stakes people and see whether you can start to move the needle yourselves on some of that stuff. So if you're interested in that, I can share my Calendly with you, or you can just put your names in the chat if you'd like one of these sessions. And then the other thing that I'm working on is a training experience that upskills you in PeakForm. So particularly for people who are consulting to other groups, if you wanted to be able to show up and do this yourselves, then it takes a minute. I would want to be able to show you how these methods work. I'd want to be able to talk about what a good OKR looks like, and how to deal with the racy situation. So I'm starting to put this together in a format that is manageable for people's schedules. So say an hour and a half, a 90-minute session once a week, and then some coaching if anybody is in the middle of trying to execute it as they're learning. That's not what I did with design thinking. And then we would record things for people who can't make it. We try to keep it a small cohort. I'm working on the numbers. I want to make it affordable, especially for people who are in this type of workshop. If you wanted to bring more people, we could look at some more numbers. But I'm going to hold an information session about it in September, which I'll record as well, just to talk about what would be in each of the modules and what you'd get out of it. And if you or anybody you know wants to add it to your learning curriculum while you're watching how to use AI videos, this is the human-centered part of it. There's lots of my stuff out there. On YouTube, for example, are PeakForm-like examples with Delta Dental, with functional medicine, and with Seattle Children's, with the clients who went through those experiences. So I can put links to all of those in a follow-up note to you guys, if that's helpful.
Just want to thank you, Hannah. This has been incredibly valuable. Appreciate it.
Wonderful. I'm so glad to hear that. I'll follow up with the recording and some other things that you can watch and some information about that session in September. Thank you so much, everybody.